Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Allocation Committee meeting for the Portland Children's Levy. I'm City Commissioner and Allocation Chair Dan Saltzman, and I'd like to introduce my fellow committee members. On my far right is Mitch Horniker, who represents the Portland Business Alliance. Next to him and next to me is Julie S. Young, and she is the citizen-appointed member representing City of Portland citizens. On my far left is Serena Stoudemire Wesley, and she represents citizens of Multnomah County appointed by the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. And next to me is Multnomah County Chair Marisa Madrigal. And now I'll introduce the Portland Children's Levy staff. Director Lisa Pellegrino, who oversees after-school investments in addition to being director. Assistant Director Meg McElroy, who is in charge of early childhood and mentoring investments. Lisa Hansel, who supervises the foster care and child abuse prevention and intervention investments. And Communications Director Mary Gay Broderick, and Fiscal Specialist John Kelly. So before we dive into our agenda, I'll just give a quick overview of the Portland Children's Levy, which was first approved by Portland voters in 2002 and overwhelmingly renewed in 2008, and again in spring of this year, again overwhelmingly renewed. The levy annually supports $10 million worth of investments through programs for early childhood, after school and mentoring, child abuse prevention and intervention, and helping children in foster care succeed. In this new funding round that we're in the midst of right now, we're pleased to also begin a new focus that voters approved of, and that is an area of hunger relief or childhood hunger. The levy operates with a 5% administrative cap, is annually audited by an independent firm, and reaches about 10,000 children and families each year. So our first item up today is approving the minutes from our November 22nd meeting. I'll entertain a motion to do that.
So moved. Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved. And next, our main discussion item today is the proposed request for investment document that we'll be issuing early next year. Before we begin our meetings, we always have a period for people to talk to us about non-agenda items. So if there's anybody here who wishes to speak to us on a topic that's not related to our request for investment document, now is your opportunity. Anybody want to talk to us? Okay. Seeing none, then we will, as I said, we will have time also for you to comment on the proposed request for investments as well. So that's what our one item on our agenda today, and that is our request for investments. And we're going to have staff who will review the request for investment for us and for our audience here. And then I also want staff to make sure that somebody watching this on TV will understand what it is too. So to walk through the holistic, what the request for investment is, what the proposed scoring is, and all that. And who am I turning it over?
Right.
Meg McElroy.
Hi. We'll get started. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to orient you and everyone here to sort of how we're going to facilitate today's discussion. First, I want to start off with just emphasizing that our goal of today's meeting is to leave with an approved draft template of the request for investment, because from that template we have to create 6 program area requests for investments. I'm going to start calling them RFIs now. In order to publish those and have them released at the in mid-January. So our hope is to get our template approved so we can get working on that. Also, a couple of the things, many of the things that are to be reviewed today were presented at November's meeting. So you have been oriented the first time around to some of the larger structural pieces, and we'll get underneath some of those today. The next thing I wanted to walk through is how we'd like to facilitate this discussion. There are 6 major issues on the agenda today to be discussed. The first is the overall RFI structure, content, and points. The second are the minimum points recommendation for 2 of the sections. The third is a goal for investment in culturally specific services. There are 2 miscellaneous changes that we'll go over, so that's 4 and 5, excuse me. And then the 6th is our funding process that we've outlined in the memo. Staff will review each of those 6 issues. After each issue is reviewed, we'll open it up to the committee for discussion. When we've completed the sort of review and discussion of all 6 of those items entirely, then we'll invite public comment and testimony on any or all of those issues. Then we'll reconvene the discussion to come to any final modifications or refinements around those 6 issues, and then we'll take votes on each of the 6 issues. Any questions on that process? Great. So to get started with our first major, Julie, did you have a question? Okay. To get started with our first major issue for discussion is the request for investment with its content revisions and the point value adjustments. Compared to the request for investment document that we used in 2009, there have been a range of modifications and improvements made to the document. It contains 4 sections that applicants would be asked to answer. Staff is going to provide an overview of each of those 4 sections, content and point values. For each of the 4 sections, after we've completed that overview, we'll talk about the RFI content. We'll open up the discussion for you all of the RFI content together. And once we talk about the content, we'll then talk a little bit more about the point values. But we kind of want to have that content discussion first to make sure there are any, in case there are any additions or modifications that you want to make, those may influence what you think about the point values. So we kind of want to cover that content discussion and then the point values. I also want to point out that there is a scoring rubric that staff has made available that defines the expectations for high-scoring applications. This is the first time we have been able to put out that scoring rubric at the same time as we're releasing the draft request for investment document. In the past, we've been sort of so squished for time that we have been creating the rubric sort of after the request for investment document is published. So we're pleased to be able to release that draft today as well for everyone to see. And then
So that's the proposed review and scoring form?
That's correct.
The rubric?
That's correct. Thanks for that clarification. So any changes that you all elect to make today to the RFI and any point changes that you elect to make, we as staff will assure are reflected in that rubric. So I'm going to move into the first section of the first of 4 sections in the RFI, so we can talk about the content and point values there. And then Lisa Hansel will talk about the budget and organizational capacity section. Lisa Pellegrino will talk about the cultural responsiveness section and the bonus points. And after we conclude that orientation and kind of review, we'll start our first sort of set of discussions around the content of the RFI. So the proven program design and effectiveness section of the RFI combines 2 sections from the 2009 RFI. In those, the 2 sections previously were program description and then also proven program design and rationale sections. We've combined these 2 sections together because past applicants often repeated much of what they put into their program description in that rationale and design section. So we found that it often didn't necessarily answer the questions we were asking about design rationale and instead repeated information that was already provided. By combining the 2 sections into one, we're hoping that it will be easier for applicants to construct clear responses into what we're seeking. The 2 combined sections still contain the, in this new now 1 section, the same 55 points as they had in the past request for investment document. And just to remind you, the 2 combined sections still cover the same content, the new, the now new 1 section covers the same general content as those 2 previous sections did. They ask about the population to be served, the types of program activities that are proposed, participation and outcome goals for clients, the rationale for that particular program design, how that program fits with Portland Children's Levy strategies for the program area, and then also more detailed information about the processes that the applicant will use for assuring the program's effectiveness. So now Lisa Hansel is going to talk about the budget and organizational capacity sections.
Okay, in the budget section, it links the funding requested with specific elements of the proposed program. In this section, we ask for a detailed proposed budget for the first year, and then total proposed budgets for years 2 and 3. We request justification for costs in 5 budget categories, also asking applicants to share their allocation methods for any indirect costs. And administrative costs cannot exceed 15% of the proposed program costs, and that's the same administrative cap that is currently set. The changes in this section really are about streamlining what is requested and really focusing on the information that's most relevant at this stage in the process. For example, we're asking for 1-year detailed budgets instead of 3-year budgets. In the past, often applicants would just give the same budget, put different years on it, and the information changes for a variety of reasons that it really wasn't necessary to have 3 years of detailed budgets. Also, we're recommending that we reduce the point value in this section from 15 to 10 points. And this is the rationale for this really is based on the review of other funding applications. The Children's Levy was on the high end for values in this category. Additionally, reviewers...
Say funding applications, can you elaborate what you mean by that?
Sure. Funding applications from other funding organizations, both government and private foundations. We reviewed, I think, about 5 or 6 different funding applications, and that was one of the things that we observed was that we were more heavily weighting budget sections than was typical. Typically, it was more around 10 points. Some other funders didn't even assign point values. It was more about completing a budget, but didn't necessarily assign point values. One of the other rationale on this is that many of our reviewers really have the content expertise and not necessarily the area of budgets isn't necessarily their expertise, and some didn't feel confident really in assessing and scoring these sections. So that's another reason for us recommending a reduced point value here. And then also that this isn't the only place that budgets are discussed. Really, staff works as part of contract negotiations, asking for more budget detail where needed. Often the amounts that are awarded are different than the amounts that they had initially requested, so budgets needs to be revised anyways. It's very common that that is part of the whole contract negotiation process.
Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So budget is only part of the section. So
Budget
why
is
the focus on budget? Because cost effectiveness and budget justification, which has 5 subcategories, it seems like a bigger part of that section. So why
Right there,
did the scorers also have a problem
with the
judging
justification.
that? Data management,
In my
administrative expenses?
experience,
do.
that was a challenging piece for people to score. We're hoping that the rubric that we have designed this time will help in people feeling more competent in doing that scoring. But it was, would you guys say that was an experience you had with your reviewers as well? People felt uncomfortable assigning scores in that section, and it's not that it's not important, it is important. But again, it was not something that people felt like they had that expertise in.
So if there are questions about a budget between the reviewing that's done by the committee of reviewers, if the staff then has questions and concerns enough that might make an impact on whether or not you could recommend the program for funding, how does that happen, or when does that happen?
So before the staff will be making recommendations to the committee about funding. Staff reviews all of the applications as well. And so for each funding application, you'll receive a summary that indicates staff comments. We will review the budgets and we'll point out any concerns that we have about anything that we think is off. So it is part of our input into the process as well. And so you'll be alerted to anything that we notice that doesn't seem appropriate or well justified in their application or reasonable.
The key piece to remember is that because almost nobody gets the full amount that they request, they always have to redo the budget. And so then the staff essentially has to do a fresh look at the budget and make sure that all of those items in there are justified correctly, that the amount of staffing seems appropriate for the program that they're going to deliver and the number of kids they're going to serve, et cetera. So it almost always has to be re-reviewed because of that factor that the people often ask for more money than they're awarded.
Seems like a lot of work for staff to have to go through the budgets of every applicant. Do you do that for all of them, or do you wait and see what the decisions made by the committees that do the reviewing?
The committees that do the reviewing don't make any decisions. They simply score the applications. But in the past, we as staff have reviewed every single application and its budget. Because we split the applications by program, like we each sort of manage a particular set of program areas, we are charged with reviewing the applications in those program areas. So we're not each reading all 100 plus applications. We're each reading a subset of those, summarizing them, reviewing their budgets, and making that information available to you along with all of the applications. So you'll have those applications as well to check against our notes if you wanted to delve deeper. But typically we are reviewing them all. We're making that score information available from reviewers, any particular issues that we have discovered, and then we're using all of that information to craft our recommendation. So you usually will get that information in one contained package: summaries, applications, and recommendations. Let me modify that. You'll get applications probably before you get summaries from us. Typically, we provide those immediately to you all. We're working on the summaries at the same time that you have them, and folks are being scheduled to review and score them. Once we have the summaries done and the scores done, we'll make all of that information available.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next section is organizational capacity. And this section asks applicants to demonstrate that they have the capacity to successfully implement and maintain a cost-effective, proven program. In this section, we ask about organizational history and structure, strategic plans, turnover in key management positions, and financial and administrative experience. In this section, the primary changes had to do with moving some of the staffing questions to the program section, and adding a specific question around financial management of grants. We've also asked for a statement of experience for any applicants who have not received PCL funding in the past 3 years, and are recommending reducing the point value from 15 to 10 points in this section. Again, the rationale for changes in this section partly come from review of other funding applications that ask for less detail and ask different kinds of questions in this section. We had really previously focused on staffing and staffing processes, while other funders tend to focus more on organizational mission, vision, and strategic plan. By adding the statement of experience, it will provide us with the opportunity to do some reference checking on organizations that we have not previously funded or have not recently funded. So that will provide some additional information for the committee in terms of their capacity and previous experience.
Is that the bullet that says evidence of the organization has substantial financial and administrative experience? Is that what you mean by the statement of experience?
I don't know what you're...
Are you on the rubric,
Looking at-
Dan?
Yeah,
Looking at the rubric.
under the scoring sheet for organizational capacity. Well, I guess, yeah, the whole subheading D is financial and administrative experience.
So that will... can you ask your question again?
So you had mentioned that for organizations that haven't been funded in the last 3 years, that they provide some statement of experience. Is that what are you referring to subsection D here, or is there something I'm missing?
The statement of experience would not be scored, and
Wouldn't-
it says
right.
that in there. So the statement of experience, if you have not had our money in the last 3 years, you do have to submit that, but it is not scored. The idea is that we would get a chance to see who else is funding the organization and in what amounts, and we would have a chance to follow up with other funders of that organization if they're new to us and we have no experience with them, to be able to call and ask for which is something that we do for other people all the time. People call us about organizations that they're thinking about funding and ask what our experience has been. So we would do that kind of reference check, and we would supply that information to the committee in a narrative format. It would not be scored. So we'd say, Louis, this is a new organization. We worked with them. Also, I want you to keep in mind on financials, there's another piece here that I know we noted somewhere, but I can't remember if it came through. John runs an audit tool on every organization that applies. So everybody who applies has to submit either an audit or financial statements. And we had our own auditors design us a tool that would, you enter all the values, various values in various places, and you have to ask John about the specifics on that, to get some sense of the financial health of the organization. And he does all of that and reports on that in the summaries as well. So that's sort of a separate evaluation of their financial health, different from their sort of financial and administrative capacity, okay, but their actual financial health. So there's numerous dimensions to how we look at financial health and organizational capacity, and that's sort of how we would imagine spanning that out.
Where's
So
that? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Where is that scored?
Where's what scored?
John's.
It's not a score. What he does is basically the tool provides, sort of. Maybe, John, I should let you talk about this.
Yeah,
It has
John,
like
what-
normal ranges and, explain how it works.
Yeah, it's a variety of metrics based on their financial statements, things like current ratio, net income, a bunch of ratios, maybe 10, and I compare them to a normal range, and if more than 4 are outside the normal range, then I do a deeper look, and I would write up a narrative about, here are the ratios that are outside, and when I looked, here's their history, their financial history.
That all comes, that comes
And that
to
comes
us.
as part of the staff summary. Any concerns would be highlighted there, just like if there were any concerns with the budget or programming or anything that staff has from staff review, including the audit tool, would come to you on that staff summary.
So not scored in the organizational history and structure.
It's not something that we provide to the reviewers to score. It is a separate source of information that we provide to you and that we use as part of our criteria for recommendations.
It just mostly because it takes more expertise. You can't ask a voluntary reviewer who doesn't know anything about these things mostly, typically. So you have to have someone, I don't even want to do it. I asked John to do it. So I just feel like that, someone with better financial background who understands what all those ratios mean is going to give you better advice about what they mean.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Okay. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. The other thing I had on there was the note about the tool, so we covered that. Move
sorry.
on to
I didn't mean to jump
Lisa's
the gun.
section. That's all right.
What section?
So for cultural responsiveness, we kind of previewed this a little bit last time in November. We took an approach to kind of rewriting this section significantly based on really coming from public input from a few different sources. We looked to our own, the city has an Office of Equity and Human Rights, and we consulted with them first when we began public input about what we might do around cultural responsiveness and equity. And they made a series of recommendations, including increasing the sort of raising the bar in what we expect around cultural responsiveness, and also raising the amount of the application for which it counts to be able to do that. We also consulted with the Coalition of Communities of Color, and they have in the process of I think they're working with, PSU is doing the drafting of this protocol for culturally responsive services, but I believe under the direction of the Coalition of Communities of Color. And so they were agreed to provide us with a draft of that. It's not a complete version yet, but we looked thoroughly through the draft, and they have a lot of elements there that they're looking for in cultural responsiveness, and we used that as a guide as we were drafting this section, as well as just general public input around the importance of culture and culturally responsive services and being effective services. So it was a combination of those sets of input that led us to kind of redraft this section. I'll kind of run through the major changes that we did to give you a sense in reaction to reading and using these different sources of input. The first is we took the degree to which the staff, management, and board reflect the population that the program is proposing to serve, and made that a scored section. We asked for that information before, but it was not specifically scored. It was just sort of a piece of information that the reviewer could take into account. But we specifically listed that on the rubric as something that you are scoring and looking at directly. Second, we ask applicants to describe their organizational commitment to cultural responsiveness and to provide examples of how they are doing, and that was something that was important to the coalition suggested, to be thinking about asking people to provide examples of what they're doing, so that you can see, get a better description. The reviewer has a better description of what's actually happening within the organization. Third, we asked applicants to describe how they gather and use the input from service users and how this input influences all aspects of policy and program. So that's another important piece, is service user voice and influence. Fourth, we asked applicants to address how they engage the communities that they're serving, so both the leadership in those communities as well as organizations that serve or represent those communities. So how much are they reaching out into the communities of people that are coming through their doors? So that's a big piece in the protocol, as well as I would say it goes back to cultural competency kind of research as well. And last, we specifically called out language accessibility and addressed it more broadly to make sure that people are thinking about that, because that is a major issue in cultural responsiveness work today, and there's a lot more protocol around it than there was when we did this 5 years ago, I would say. So we added some specific questions related to that. So any questions before I go on to bonus points?
More question? So I thought this was great work, and I think you did a great job of laying out what really is important, so I'm totally supportive of it. I did note some redundancy in the first section and this section. For instance, section 4B is demographic characteristics of the organization, client, staff, and in section 1B3, the question is demographics of the population.
So the reason so here's we didn't have our PDFing software broke down at the last minute, so we couldn't give you the chart that we were asking for in 4B. And what that asks for, so the one that's in 1B is asking for the population served by this program. The one that we're asking for in 4B is asking for the entire organization's clients, okay? Because if we're asking about the board and the management staff to understand whether they reflect the population served by that organization, there may well be broader populations served by the organization than by the program for which they're coming to PCL for funding. So if, for instance, you're serving 30% Latinos and 30% African Americans in your organization, but you're applying to us for a program specifically directed at Latinos, a culturally specific program perhaps, we would want to understand that you were trying to reach and expected to reach primarily Latinos in the program demographic section, but in the organizational section, we'd be looking to say, okay, if you're serving two distinct populations, is your management and board reflective of those populations as well? Okay, so that's why we asked it that way, and that's a good point, because we were concerned that people would think we were duplicating. We're trying not to duplicate that question. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I guess we'll have to see the breakout, because that's just one example. I mean, there's a lot of references in the first section to cultural considerations, equity goals, cultural considerations again. So I just feel, again, that's not bad, good, or indifferent, just a question of redundancy and scoring.
We're trying, so if you look at some of the protocols, it might be more clear too if you saw some of the protocols, they're kind of two different areas. One some things they call, it's kind of an odd name called service-based equity. So it's around how do you, when you're implementing your services, how are you specifically taking into account cultural responsiveness as you're doing it? And we tried to take those questions and put that in the program section, because we want to understand it with regard to the specific program that folks are proposing to do for us, or to do for other people, but that we would fund. And so in the cultural responsiveness section, the questions we're asking there are broader, I would say. They're about the whole organization, and they're more broadly about policy and how you are changing and reacting to the cultures that you're serving as an organization. So we tried to kind of divide those two up, focusing primarily on the program in the first, and focusing more on the organization as a whole in the second, if that makes sense. So I mean, I agree. We're trying to, it's emphasized in both sections. You're right. It's emphasized in both sections. Hopefully, we haven't been too redundant. Although, honestly, if you have specific things you would want us to take out or move or change, I mean, we're totally open to that.
No, I just
Okay.
wondered.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Lisa, when you all break those down. it's
Oh, you
not on.
want to, is your mic on? Sorry, it's just that people
Yeah,
can't
it's
hear.
on.
Okay.
Just need to talk and speak
Okay.
into it.
You have to talk loud.
When you breaking those families down, so if you say 30% Latinos and 30% African Americans, are you taking into consideration that you're looking at more than just the head of the family or the household head, but also the kids in the family? Because some families, because there are a lot of merging together, so you might have a Hispanic mom, but African American kids. So are you looking at it that broad or that deeply? Or since a lot of organizations are changing how they're starting to capture a lot of the families, so is that going into, are you taking that into effect?
It depends, because it depends on how we're somewhat beholden to how the organization collects I mean, at this stage of the game, when we're asking for people to report directly to us, we can describe very exactly how we want them to report to us and to capture what you're talking about. So that would be a duplicated account potentially, right? So people are many different things. They might be many different races or cultures, which they want to reflect fully on their demographics. They also, in the sort of, if you look at the school system or you look at other governments who collect information, they are often asking for some primary identification. So an unduplicated count. If we're doing an unduplicated count, how do you want to be counted? So if you, whatever you want to name yourself to be, you can be counted as that, but only choose one is the answer. So for people who are providing, we're asking, these are unduplicated counts, right? So in this section, this is unduplicated counts because there isn't probably an easy way to do it otherwise, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess my question is because one family just could probably not count as one, especially what if you have a white mom and African American kids? I guess to me that would be like two.
We've asked
And the family
it's a really good point. We've asked the applicant to sort of choose what makes in completing the tables of information they have to complete on demographic information for the population to be served in that first section, population section. We've asked the applicant to convey the information around the population that sort of makes the most sense to convey. So if it makes the most sense for them to talk about children, because that's really the primary beneficiary of the service, then to talk about the children as opposed to the children and mom. If they're really focusing on both, then they can convey both. But we've tried to ask them to focus on one population, one of those primarily, and whichever one makes kind of the most sense for the program model that they're proposing. Does that help?
So is there like a multiracial question or something that they can ask
Yes.
as well?
Yes.
Okay.
So other questions on this section before we scoot on? Okay, so last one before we kind of take a look at the whole section is bonus points. Basically, we didn't really advocate making any changes to the bonus points that we did last time around in the 2009 RFI. We had 3 bonus points available if you served east of 82nd Avenue as defined by particular zip codes, and we had 3 bonus points if you met the definition of a culturally specific program. We didn't really get any public input that suggested we should change that, with the exception of foster care, in which the input was we should serve foster kids wherever they are because this is specifically aimed at foster kids, which are a very high-risk group, and it doesn't matter what part of town they're living in. So the idea was not to award bonus points for serving east of 82nd Avenue in the foster care program area, which we thought made sense, and agreed and are asking you that we would adopt that change. Other than that, we did not receive any input that really suggested we should change the bonus points. In fact, I would say to the contrary, most people supported keeping them. So that's the only change we're recommending with this. I don't know if folks have questions about them.
Yeah, Lisa, if we increase the cultural competency, is it still necessary to have bonus points for the same topic? I mean, really, we're going from, looks like the prior grant was 18 total points, and now we're at 28 total points.
Keeping in mind there are two different things. So the cultural responsiveness section, everybody has to answer those questions. So any organization needs to, I mean, you could be a culturally specific program and you might not be able to answer those questions as well as maybe a mainstream program that's culturally responsive. You may not have as many of the elements in there. So everybody is going to be scored on how responsive they are based on these types of practices and the kinds of things the questions are asking about. The culturally specific services was really going to the public input around we need more culturally specific services that people really wanted. They want to keep our level of investment, and many people advise we increase it. So to advantage culturally specific programming, everybody responds to this section regardless of whether you're culturally specific. So we're expecting everyone who applies for levy funds to be culturally responsive. But if you are culturally specific, you would be eligible for those bonus points. So it was really a different aim, I guess is what I would say. So culturally specific organizations need to be responsive to all populations they're serving. They may be primarily directed at a particular population, but they may actually find other people coming through their doors and be, and they need to be responsive to that as well, and often have had to deal with that sometimes. So I mean, we want that for both or I should say all types of programming that are coming through our doors. But that other policy priority was kind of meant to address a different issue. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Well, did you want to follow up on it?
No, not on that. I have a different comment.
Okay, well, just to follow up on Mitch's point, or the question he raised. So I assume that in our request for information documents, we define what culturally specific means, and we define what culturally responsive means.
It's right in the RFI.
Yep, page 18.
Yeah, we do that first, and then we ask the questions.
I'll make sure.
I just wanted to make a note in regards to bonus points for programs east of 82nd. We do have, in our minutes from our last meeting, there was public testimony recommending that we serve North Portland as an area that would be rewarded bonus points. That's not something that the committee voted on, but I did want to note that for the record, that we did have that public input.
Yes, that's true. And North was prioritized for programming as well. I think one of the issues has been what folks have come to advocate for in the past has been that although both have high incidences of poverty and diverse populations, the service provision has been much more concentrated in the core of the city and in the inner neighborhoods. And because North Portland has just been historically has significant levels of poverty, that there has been historically many more organizations serving that area than there are in the East. Portland has changed so radically over the last 20 years. It's been a very slow migration out of service providers to East Portland, and that's been the issue. So the part of the reason for the policy priority was to incentivize organizations to serve that population. And I have to say, I think we've seen that over time. I mean, we've seen organizations pay more attention to serving East than they otherwise might have because of things like this, because of a focus of attention of funders.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Maybe I didn't understand or didn't really hear about why you're not doing it for applications, for the foster home applications, when the kids in foster care are more kids of color, and so those kids are in foster care and they have moved out to East County. So why are there no bonus points for that particular program? Except for foster care program area.
Because the feedback was that we should be prioritized. It doesn't matter where foster kids live in town, that this is a population-focused program area, and it doesn't matter. I mean, in other words, you could be living in Southwest, but if you're a foster youth, you're at likely much higher risk for many poor outcomes than another kid living in the Southwest. And so that if we're focusing this on foster youth specifically, that the program should be following that population wherever they are, and not be prioritizing people in East, because what if the kids didn't live in East? In other words, we don't have any data that suggests that more foster kids live in East Portland. That may be true, I don't know, but they also move a fair amount. And so there's concern that we not prioritize a geography for this population, but instead prioritize the population itself. Does that make sense? That was feedback that we got. We hadn't thought of it, actually.
Right.
And that was feedback that we got. So I thought actually it was, we took it to heart, I guess.
Want to make sure nobody's getting left out.
Yeah, I understand.
So you all have sort of moved into the discussion we were kind of aiming for at this point. We went over all 4 sections of the RFI and kind of wanted to look at the content of it as a whole or in individual sections and talk through whether or not there were additions or modifications that you wanted to make before we started talking about the point values that we reviewed. So there are additional questions about the content.
Or things people want modified, or things people want changed or moved, or eliminated, or any of those kind of things.
Are you going to talk about the narrow eligible applicants, or is that in a
We will
different
get there.
section?
We'll get there.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
We just want to, this is sort of the body of the content of what we're asking people to give us, and just wanted to do a check to see, do people want to change any of those things? Do people want to move anything? Ask something to be rewritten, or whatever?
Add something that they didn't see. And knowing too that we'll have the opportunity for testimony on this as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Compared with our past request for investment documents, I mean, I think I'm of the philosophy that our request for investment process has gotten better each time we've done it. Do you feel that this proposed request for investment document is clear and concise, or will be more clear and more concise in terms of the responses we get than in previous? Or are we setting up, there's a lot of things an applicant needs to speak to. And you were mentioning in our previous request for investment, you found a lot of overlap or redundancy in the budget section or the program.
Program section.
Program
So
section
we tried to
with-
collapse that.
Right. So I guess I'm just trying to get at, we're not asking for stuff that's overly redundant.
Guess we hope
That we're going to
not.
get, that we're going to get boilerplate responses for. That's my concern.
I mean, we hope
That's all of
not.
our concerns, yeah.
Right.
I mean,
And I'm not saying that in a disparaging manner to our applicants. I'm saying, sometimes if you drill down too much, you're giving people statements they may not be able to answer, and, that are larger societal issues or global problems that one just can't distill down to a pithy paragraph or two.
I think we understand what you're getting at. And I think we had that lens in mind as we tried to revisit the old RFI and craft this new one. I mean, we did definitely look at sort of lessons learned from the old one that we had noted amongst ourselves, and had a debrief session with the committee that was in place at that time after the previous process. And so sort of took that feedback and review process to heart as we crafted this new version. And I think we tried very hard to look at where there were similar types of questions being asked or similar types of information being requested. And as we noted earlier, we did read all of the applications in our program areas. And so I think we were sort of able to see where the questions that we asked didn't get to what would have been helpful information. And reviewers provided feedback as well, especially around the rubric. So we tried to take kind of all of that together in putting together this, what we think is an improved version. Testimony will help reveal that momentarily.
You may have some disagreement on that point, I'm not sure. But yes, that was the idea, was to improve it, try to make it more concise, try to use more charts, because charts will help get you information, tables, I guess tables is the word. Hopefully to get information in formats that are easier for reviewers to digest. Sometimes a lot of words are hard for people to separate out, and sometimes when something's in a table, it's easier to read for people. So we're trying to find alternate methods to make it simpler to apprehend the information and relatively quickly, because people have to read, a number of applications.
I just have a comment. I really appreciate the work that you did on the culturally responsive programs and organizations section. I think there's some really specific, concrete questions that everybody's going to be able to answer. They might not, they might have to answer no, but they're very concrete questions, and I think it's going to be a great quality improvement tool. So thank you.
And one of the points of that, just to keep in mind, I mean, this is coming from our Office of Equity and Human Rights, was that this also information is a good baseline, so that if you monitor going forward, first of all, you have an understanding of where people might need assistance or technical assistance or whatever, but you also have a way to understand what kind of improvement do you want to see and where would it go. And that's something that we have not monitored for in the past and that we plan to monitor for in the future. And I thought that was a really good suggestion, as using the application as a way to get a good sense for that. So we're hoping that we'll do that. Knowing that people are in different places, everybody needs to travel down that road, but the point is that people are thinking about traveling down the road and taking steps to get there.
Being a newbie here, so if someone applies in a different areas, so they have to do this 2 and 3 times across areas, or there's just certain information that they'll have to add to their application. So if someone applies
One
in
application.
One application?
If you have one program, if you have a program that might qualify under different program areas for funding. For instance, the classic example is a child abuse prevention program that is also an early childhood program because of the ages it's serving and the type of things it's offering. It could potentially be eligible to receive funding in 2 different funding areas. They only have to submit 1 application. They need to show that it meets whatever it is they're trying to apply under in each area, so the proper age range, et cetera. Would need to serve the right age of people in child abuse prevention. And then there's a process outlined in the RFI for how we'll make that decision, but it only has to be 1 application in that case. You can be an agency that has multiple programs that you want to apply in multiple program areas, and then yes, you do have to submit separate applications because they're different programs. But if it's 1 program, just 1.
So if you're applying for an early childhood program and an after-school program, that's 2 different program areas, 2
Yes.
different applications.
2 different applications, and there's no way around that. We can't do, because then it's all the specifics. We need to know the specifics before we decide to fund it. Does that make sense?
But I imagine a lot of the information that would go in those 2 different applications would be
The same.
the same. for
The
everybody.
organizational capacity is going to be the same.
And the cultural
responsiveness, so you don't have to write the whole thing, you just have to cut and paste. So that
Program
part's
and
easy.
budget sections would be unique to the specific proposed program.
Yeah. It has to be complete because with a review, we're just packaging things off to reviewers who are different for different program areas, so that's why. But cutting and pasting is not too hard. That's the easiest part of your job.
If you feel like the,
I've got another question.
Go ahead.
Dan. And this is just probably a point of clarity, but item E4 in section 1 looks like it's a look back at outcomes. And then item F2 is a look forward, telling us what tools you're going to use to track outcomes. And I thought that the information, the way F2 is stated and the scoring for F2 is great. I just wondered if we should, or what was the logic for not putting any validation information into the reported look back outcomes, if that makes sense. Meaning
Validation?
we ask them, tell us what your outcomes have been. We don't put any restrictions on, for instance, what screening tools, what assessment tools they use, were there interviews, do they have case note forms, all those things that we say you have to use going forward, or you have to demonstrate you're going to use them going forward if we fund you.
Well, put it this way, I think that a program that if they reported a bunch of outcomes in E3 or E4, outcome data, and they had no tools or no specification, they had nothing that they had done in the past, I mean, we'd be asking for people to tell us not just what they were going to do going forward, but what they had done. Am I not right about
Maybe
that?
that's where this, I guess it would be helpful if we saw the scoring, but reading E4, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say tell us how you got there. It tells you to report what your outcomes are.
right, and then F2 is sort of tell us how you got there.
Yeah, but they're not asking about.
They might be different,
You're
yeah.
saying, you've designed a program, now tell me how you're going to track outcomes. That's all looking forward. E4 is, you're an existing organization, tell me about your current programs and what your outcomes are.
Well, we're asking, all would be in the context of this specific program. And so F2 says, tell us the protocols, the screening tools, the assessment forms, whatever you're using, does the program use, which to me means currently use, or if you're a new program. So we're trying, basically all these questions are structured so that if you're an existing program coming to us for funding, that you're supposed to tell us what you're doing right now. If you are a program that's new, if you're designing a new program, which we have funded in the past, sometimes a new program, then you can tell us what you plan to do, okay? But you can't get out of telling us what you do now if you're already doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if that's not being conveyed well here, then maybe we need to work on the language, is what I am taking from what you're saying. We should
Yeah.
work on this language a
You
bit
just
and make
hit
it
on
more
the
clear.
head. Is we're assuming that they're currently using the same tools that they say they're going to use in the future for their current outcomes. So you're saying it'll all come out.
Well-
Meaning because it's an existing program, so we're a foster care program, and we're proposing to get funded as a foster care program, we say our outcomes are 80%. And then we say, and this is how we're going to track them in the future. We're assuming that how we're told they're going to track them in the future is how they have been tracking them and came up with the 80%.
Well, the question doesn't ask about the future. It says, what do you use now to get the, so I mean, we can maybe rewrite that to make it more clear. That we're asking for the tool, whatever you told us your outcomes were,
In
tell us.
E4.
In E4, tell us
Measured
how you
them.
measured that. Okay, so that was the goal of that question. What you're telling me is that's not clear, so we can make that clear.
So when we ask about what do you plan to use, that's just for the new programs that don't currently exist, but we can.
We can make that more clear.
clearer.
We can make it more clear that you should answer these questions. If the program is not currently operating, answer it based on what you plan. Okay, if it's currently operating, answer it based on what you use. Now, you're right that there are subtleties in there, Mitch, because people do change the assessment tools over time, and there's not going to be space in an application to detail everything there. But to the best of their ability to tell us how they're doing it, or at least how they've been doing it for the most recent past, is what we're after.
Yeah, I'm sure I made it more complicated than it needs to be, but it is one of the most important factors in determining whether there'll be success going forward is how they've done in the past.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Well,
we
that-
want them to be able to report.
We want the same thing. It's just a question of we need to ask it more clearly, is what you, because it always helps to have another set of eyes. You live in this, and we live in it way too much. So it's helpful to hear someone else's thoughts on it. Okay, we will make those clarifications to make sure that we're being clear, that we're referring to how they got the outcomes, how they measured the outcomes that they just reported in the previous question.
Any other questions? So now you're going to walk us through the point
Yes.
The point scoring for each of these
Yes, we
sections?
tackled first one of 6 issues for
Well, these others
today.
should go more quickly.
Yes. So the next one is that staff recommends having minimum point values in 2 different sections of the RFI. For the first section, the program section, staff recommends a minimum point value of 39 out of the 55 possible points. And in the fourth section of the RFI, cultural responsiveness, staff recommends a minimum point value of 16 out of the 25 possible points. And our reasons for this recommendation are that they set a clear minimum standard to the applicants about what we're seeking, and that it would help assure that any funded programs would meet minimum standards of quality. So discussion on this set of this recommendation.
Have a question. So, because I haven't followed the process closely before, so have there been situations where the committee had to consider funding applications that were subpar? And is this an attempt to fix a problem or just refine the system? Is it a response to something that happened in the past, or?
Well, we didn't have any minimum point values in the past, so no, not necessarily. I do think that as we have gone along and learned more, we've definitely realized that there are applications that when there's information that's confusing or they're low, and they often get a low score as a result of that, it does beg the question about whether or not they really should be considered for funding, especially when others are clearly more well organized and have put forth a better application. So I think this is more an effort to try to be more realistic when we come to the point of funding decisions about who's really eligible, what that pool of applicants really looks like, and to try to screen out those that probably shouldn't be really considered for funding as a result of not having put together the highest scoring application.
Well, and as a result of the Children's Levy emphasis on proven programs too, as opposed to pilots or demonstrations.
It was more of a formalization attempt than a reaction, per se.
Okay.
So. No other questions? Okay. So the next one was we were asking to put language in the RFI that would set a goal of investing 30% of the funds in each program area in culturally specific services. We currently, just by way of reference, invest about 31%, or have invested about 31% of total revenues or total funds in culture-specific programming in the first 3 years of the levy. That has not necessarily been equally divided or equally spread out amongst all program areas. And we were asking for that to be set as a goal, understanding that it's a goal, and we may not be able to meet it if we don't get applications. I mean, we can. The idea behind this is to incentivize people to apply, right, in each program area. That's kind of the concept. However, if people are not incentivized and they don't apply, I mean, I wouldn't. We would, as staff, would not recommend funding applications that say scored very lowly or didn't meet minimum points or something along those lines, if they were, just because they offered a culturally specific service. So you have to do both. It's not only one. But we recommended doing this because we thought it was an important thing that the county, for instance, does in their Sun service system, which is a system that's sort of most close to what we fund. They let about a third of the total funding to culturally specific programming as well. So that's and there's. I think it's the right goal to have. I don't know that it's achievable necessarily in every program area. We'll have to see what we get. But I think it's where we should be heading. Did you have a question, Julie?
No, but I agree. I think if we're only currently, only 6% of the resources in the child abuse prevention intervention area are in this area, going from 6% to 30% it's going to be a reach without possibly compromising what those applications look like. I mean, I realize we have to, the decision has to be made. There's still to still make sure that we are funding programs that are showing that they are going to have good outcomes and so on, and that they are viable organizations. But that is just
keep in mind it depends on who applies, Julie. So the last set of application decisions were made based on who applied in that round. But the whole point of doing this would be to incentivize different applicants potentially in that area, particularly in child. I mean, Lisa has noted many times in child abuse prevention, that's concerning because the highest, the overrepresentation of Native and African American youth and foster care is a concern that we're not kind of preventing potentially to the best of our ability on the other side.
I mean, I agree with it. I'm not questioning that at all. I'm just pointing out the obvious.
It would be in change, yes.
Yes.
Any other questions on that goal, or? Okay. No? All right, Lisa, you want to finish
Now we
this up?
move on to miscellaneous changes. Staff recommends 2 technical changes that affect eligibility to apply for grants. The first being narrowing eligible applicants to nonprofit corporations, local education agencies, community colleges, and universities, and eliminating for-profit corporations and other government agencies as eligible applicants. The rationale for this is that the levy has never funded for-profit corporations or other government agencies in the past. For-profits have a need for profit margin, and government entities tend to have high administrative costs. And by narrowing the list of eligible applicants, we will maximize funding to directly benefit children and families. So that's the first recommendation. And the second is to raise the minimum annual grant level from $30,000 per year to $50,000 a year. And as you've heard throughout this funding process, one of the goals is to decrease the total number of grants that we do end up funding. This will be one way of doing that, and will prevent small organizations that don't necessarily have the capacity to meet the accountability requirements of the levy to prevent them from applying in the first place. So questions or discussion about?
So I guess even though we've probably never received an application from a private company, I guess
I believe we've received a couple in the past, but we've not funded any for-profit organizations in the past.
So yeah, I guess I'm just in thinking about this a little bit more. Why do we want to necessarily prescribe that a for-profit corporation can't apply? I mean, suppose KinderCare, in partnership with Early Head Start, comes forward with something that's really amazing. Why would we want to say, well, because you're a for-profit corporation, we can't look at you? Well, yeah, sure, everybody's got a profit margin, but then every agency has an overhead number, and we're smart enough here, I think, to figure that all out. So I guess I'm sort of leaning towards eliminating the prohibition on for-profit corporations from being an applicant.
I mean, it's partly just they haven't been competitive typically, and so it just seemed like we're wasting their time. And
Well, because they haven't been in the past doesn't mean they can't be in the future.
Can I,
Yep.
can I chime in? So I see your point on the administrative costs, because I think whether it's a corporation or a nonprofit, they're going to have to pay for staff and overhead. I mean, overhead is, computers, and everybody's going to have to pay that. But I think when you introduce profit, I mean, profit is something that goes back to shareholders, or it goes outside the community. It goes, for bonuses. I mean, for me, I have a conflict thinking about tax dollars going back into lining someone's pockets beyond the administrative cost. I mean, I suppose if a for-profit organization came forward and said, we're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts because we believe in the community and we're not going to profit on this, we're just going to cover our costs, that would be something. But
Okay, well, we're under this proposal, we wouldn't even allow that. So we wouldn't allow that kind of conversation to occur with us.
Well, I just think the bottom line is it's not, the point to me is that you have to, if you're a for-profit, you have to have a profit, right? I mean, it's over and above your costs, over and above your overhead, whereas a nonprofit is you're just paying the overhead and the staffing. So to me,
Well, if you have a for-profit that gets profit plus overhead that's less than
how realistic is
administrative
that?
expense. I don't know, and that's, I want to allow for the possibilities. You want to rule them out, I guess I'm saying, why not
Because
allow for the
we get hardly
imagine the
any, and
possibilities.
we would end up advising not to fund them because their costs or structures are higher by nature.
Oh, I mean, we can go there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I thought we were going to hear that you're getting a ton of them, and none of them are ever competitive, and this was a way to, make it easier on staff and eliminate a big group. If a for-profit comes in and let's just make it easy. It's apples to apples. You've got a for-profit and a nonprofit, and let's, make it a for-profit school or kindergarten. That's a great example. And yeah, they have a profit margin in, but it's still their proposal is it's less expensive than a not-for-profit because they run a lot more staff or for whatever reason. Why wouldn't we choose the lower cost provider?
Well, if they don't get the same outcomes. But but I think what we're hearing you say
Saying
is
apples
that
to apples.
you are,
I don't want to eliminate it.
yeah.
It's not worth arguing about.
What about, go ahead, not Julie.
Well, I would also call attention to the universities. You're not clarifying whether they're public or private universities.
Oh, that's a good catch. We were assuming public, but that's a good catch.
Any
I
other
guess, yeah.
comments on the other
Okay.
pieces there of that recommendation?
I mean, the minimum, or?
Yeah.
I thought that's a great idea. I mean, I'm hearing from you guys that will have a material impact on administrative and review. So
Right.
I don't know, what kind of, is that bandwidth, are we expecting that to have a significant impact or a modest impact?
Modest.
Which is probably better. I mean, if it was having a dramatic impact, we probably really need to do some soul searching about raising the minimum.
I think part of the issue too is to assure that we get organizations that can actually meet the accountability standards, because I hate to waste people's time, and I feel like, if people really can't, to do this much accountability, you need to get enough money to make it worth it, and you need to have enough staff and infrastructure to be able to do it. And I think I don't want to mislead people, because I feel like that's just creates a lot of work for them, and they're on shoestring budgets, so it doesn't seem like a good use of time.
Okay, ready to move to the next piece? Next, we have two process changes this time around. The first is to have a two-step process for making the funding decisions, and this is outlined in the RFI as well. The first meeting, staff would make recommendations for funding and present their rationale for that. Applicants would provide testimony, and the committee would have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and also of the applicants and not make any funding decisions at that first meeting. And at the second meeting, which we're hoping to schedule a week after the first, would be a chance for the committee members to clear up any questions in that intervening time, to consider any additional testimony, and applicants would have an opportunity to advocate during that time period as well if they chose to do so. At that second meeting, then the decision would be made about the funding. And this really comes as listening to complaints about the last time, where the committee really didn't have enough time to hear and reflect and consider the funding requests, and applicants as well not having the information. Oh wait, that's the next part. Sorry, but really not having the time to reflect and make those decisions. So that's the first process change, and then the second process change is about putting out the staff recommendations at least 2 business days prior to the first meeting in the series here, so that applicants can digest what we've recommended and why, and have the time to prepare a response on their end. So those are the 2 process changes that we're recommending this time around.
2 business days?
2 business days prior to
To whatever
the
meeting.
first allocation committee meeting for that group. So if we're looking at early childhood proposals, then they would get those, the applicants that applied in that area would receive the staff recommendations 2 days prior.
If we're meeting on a Monday like today, those recommendations
week.
will be available on
Previous.
Thursday?
Right, right.
Yes. And it would be at where the recommendations are going to be first considered. Does that make sense? So that's good in advance of the vote of what
Right.
decisions we made.
So
So
it'd
the
be
idea
like a
is
week
more
and a
time.
half ahead of the decision. The applicants would have staff recommendations and rationale for those recommendations.
And the scores as well, I mean, because our recommendations are based partly on scoring, so they would have the whole shebang.
Right.
So could you just summarize for us and for everybody out here the points assigned to each category for the request for investment?
Sure. You want to go for it?
Sure. The 4 sections of the RFI with their point values are as follows. Proven program design and effectiveness, 55 points. Budget and budget justification, 10 points. Organizational capacity, 10 points. And cultural responsiveness, 25 points. And then a total of 3 bonus points for majority of clients served residing east of 82nd Avenue, and 3 bonus points for being a culturally specific program or organization.
And then the minimum points?
The minimum point recommendation is 39 points out of 55 for the proven program design and effectiveness section, and a minimum of 16 out of 25 points for the cultural responsiveness section.
Great. So are we at the point of taking testimony, or is there
Absolutely.
further discussion? Okay. Okay, so this is the chance for our public to weigh in, and let me just have a show of hands. How many people wish to address us? I only see 1 hand. Wow. Okay, well, come on up. 2. Come on up. Both of you come on up, and I bet your testimony will induce others to want to testify.
I hope so.
So if you could just give us your name and your organization if you wish to, and you each have 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes, yeah.
My name is Michael Oresti. I'm with Portland OIC, and my question is around residency and eligibility. A lot of our students the main house of Portland OIC is located in North Portland. We recently opened up a high school in East Portland with a Gresham address. But a lot of those kids that we serve in our East campus have Portland addresses. So we're at a quandary. I guess we need a clarification about if we can serve those kids. They reside in Portland with Portland zip codes, but they attend a school that's technically at 181st, which is considered Gresham. So,
We'll have staff answer your questions after we get all the testimony.
okay, so
Yeah.
that's my question.
Okay.
We are going to have the program part of a program or all of it, depending on the response, is going to be at the North Portland location. But there are also kids in East Portland that need those services, but because of a line and zip code.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Good afternoon, Mark McKechnie.
You need to, if you're going to use that one, press the button.
Okay.
There you go.
Good afternoon, I'm Mark McKechnie from Youth Rights and Justice. I haven't had a lot of time to digest this and think it through, but I did want to comment that it appears to me that the scoring on the cultural competency section is perhaps overly focused on race and ethnicity to the exclusion of other aspects of culture. And I think it again, going back to my comments at a previous meeting about being more open-ended, I think there are other important aspects of culture, particularly looking at different types of program models, sexuality, gender, socioeconomic status, are also important aspects of culture. And in the foster care arena, there are overlays to all of these that are complex. And I would like to have more opportunity to explain our competence in serving our clients in ways that isn't limited merely to race. Obviously, race is important, and a lot of the issues we tackle do have to do with racial disparities in the school system as well as the foster care system. But there are other aspects to cultural competence in our line of work that wouldn't seem to earn points in the way that the scoring is outlined in this document. And I think it's important, that we are able to identify the needs and barriers of our clients and understand things from their point of view. And sometimes race is an important part of that, but it's not always the end all and be all of that. And in our line of work, there are other areas that are also very important that aren't culture per se, although ability and disability is often identified as an aspect of cultural competence, and that's a very important one in our line of work, serving students with disabilities. But understanding trauma and the effects on families and children who've experienced trauma is also an important area of competence for us. Understanding families affected by addiction and the children who grew up in those families, domestic violence as well, understanding families who've had multiple generations of justice system involvement. Those are all important things that our staff have a lot of experience around, where there is often a racial element in many of these issues, but there's more than that. And just my concern is that some of the scoring aspects on the cultural competency section only refer to race, ethnicity, and in some cases language, to the exclusion of other aspects. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else wish to testify? Come on up. Okay, again, you can just give us your name and affiliation, and you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Lowcamp. I'm with First Robotics Competition Team 1432 After School Mentoring, Tutoring, and Workforce Training Program. Your budget section says that your smallest budget grant that you'll give out is $50,000, and it cannot exceed 30% of your total budget. I am concerned that your reviewers will consider only cash budget items which would minimize the efforts of groups that make up the majority of their budget through donations of in-kind donations. We function with a small amount of money, but if you look at what we have in materials and equipment that have been donated for the use in our program, we've got a $200,000 budget. But if you look at our money, it's a whole different picture. And I would hate to see that a worthy, functional, very successful program not be considered simply because they don't use a lot of money, but they still have a high-value program.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, why don't we have staff come up and answer provide response? Oh, was there somebody else? Oh, yeah, come on up. Anybody else? Now's your chance.
Yes, my name is Ken Dale. I'm Director of Peninsula Children's Learning Center. I've talked with Meg about this, so it's maybe beating a dead horse, but I just want to bring it to your attention. On your deadlines, when things are to be done and when your decisions are going to be made, for those organizations that have a July 1st through June 30th fiscal year, I would hope that you'll move this along as quickly as possible. Like in our case, we'll have to do 2 different budgets. One budget reflecting if we get funded or partial funding, another budget if we get no funding. Because you state in this, you'll at least know by June 30th to begin in July 1st. Since this is due in March, I would hope then you would move this process along very quickly, so there would be several months or a month maybe before to make decisions to give organizations a chance, if they're not going to get funding, to revise their budget, because for organizations like us, and I'm sure like many others, it's an important part of their whole budget. It makes a big difference on what their budget is, not just an add-on program.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Okay, Lisa and Meg, you want to come up here? And Lisa. So I guess first question, the residency issue. I know we've had this with other programs we funded. So do you want to just explain the issue about if your service is provided outside of Portland, but you serve people who live within the city?
We have typically gone with the residency of the child being served. So if the child is a resident of the city of Portland, then the program has been eligible to receive funding.
Okay. On some sort of pro rata basis, I assume, like.
Well, typically, well, let me clarify something with Mike. I mean, POIC is currently, as its administrative headquarters, located in North Portland. Is that correct?
Right.
So the agency itself seeking funding is based in Portland. The children they are seeking to fund, right, yes, prorated, however many there are, must be residents of the city of Portland. So if they're proposing to serve 30 children and 25 of them are going to be residents of the city of Portland, then we need to assure that our money is only benefiting the 25 who are residents of Portland, not all 30.
Okay.
Does that help clarify?
Yes, yeah.
Does that help
And then
clarify?
Can I just ask one other quick question? Is it resident of the city of Portland strictly by zip code, or is there a line? Do you guys draw a line?
We have typically done zip code and mailing address, so
Okay, so anywhere that says Portland, Oregon, you're a resident of the city of Portland.
that's correct.
Perfect, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So the next issue, cultural responsiveness are focused on race and ethnicity. Perhaps other
Yes.
issues are worthy of equal consideration, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to take part of this, and I suspect my colleagues may chime in. We regret that we weren't able to PDF altogether the application, the draft RFI with a table that is a quintessential part of the RFI section 4. So the table that's will be asked of applicants to fill out doesn't just look at race and ethnicity about the clients served by the entire organization or management staff or the board. It asks other variables, and applicants are invited in the application instructions to insert any other relevant rows that they want to use to talk about other demographic characteristics of the clients that they serve, their staffing, and their board members. The same is true in section 1 with the population to be served. There are numerous variables, demographic variables listed in there, not just race and ethnicity. There are socioeconomic status variables in there as well, and disability. So again, I encourage applicants to take more literally the suggestion in the application that they can insert rows and cater the application to talk about the population they're going to serve and how their program is best suited to that population. And in the cultural responsiveness section, talk about how their organization responds as an organization to the cultures that it serves, however they have chosen to define them. I will go on to say that I do think it's an important element of that section 4 that we are looking at race and ethnicity and language as it pertains to culture. 2/3 of the children that have been served by the Levy for several years are children of color, and we need to assure that the organizations serving them have the capacity, knowledge, and skills to do so. So I think that there are still questions in that section that we've put in there specifically to get at those issues of culture.
The next question was about cash versus in-kind calculations in terms of what an agency's budget size may be? I guess that would be the germane question there.
It's the, I mean, I almost have to go back and look myself to be able to answer. I mean, some of these things we can clear up on the back end, but my recollection is the revenues, we're looking at their financial statements.
Right.
And
Last
so-
closed fiscal year.
Last closed fiscal year revenues
And that,
on a financial statement or an audit, keeping in mind that even to be funded by us, you have to go get an audit. So even if you don't have one to start with, you'll have to get one afterwards. So it has to be an organization of a size and with a level of revenue that is auditable. So that is a requirement. If
Do you have
their programs
anything
are
down?
small, and are not in that category, then they need to probably find a partner and try to come on board with our funding through a partner, like through a SUN program or through someone else who's offering some kind of umbrella for them.
John, did you have a?
Yeah, in-kind can be part of revenue. It's pretty technical. It tends to be people like doctors, lawyers contributing time, just folks volunteering. It's gap stuff. There are gap rules around that. So it's not wholly excluded. Material things are certainly counted on and can be included in financials, but me just volunteering to tutor wouldn't count. A doctor coming in and doing something doctory would count.
Doctory.
Okay.
Yeah.
technical term.
And then the last question, just about the deadlines. So I understand we're looking to have applicants respond to us sometime early March. Is that correct?
Yes,
So if you want to just walk us through the deadlines
sure.
or our decision dates.
We haven't set all the deadlines yet, but basically, the applications come in the beginning of March. But remember, we have to put review committees together, and review committees have to meet, and they have to score. We have to read and summarize all the applications, get that information to you, and give you time to review it as well before we set the first meeting. So basically, I mean, we're just working off of about how much, with the staffing that we have, about how much we can get done in that period of time. So I think, although I would love to be done earlier, I don't want to promise that. Because we have less FTE due to cuts than we have had in the past, so we don't have more time available to move it quicker. So I don't want to promise that we could do that. I think it would be challenging. I mean, unless my staff's going to say something different.
No, I mean, I think we recognize that it's imperfect, that organizations will not know the status of funding until possibly the first week of July, with fiscal years that begin 3 weeks later. And we apologize for that, and it's a less than ideal circumstance.
I mean, if we can move it up, we will try. But I can't. I just don't know that I can promise. A lot depends on the volume of applications. We never know that until we get it, and also on review committees and how they're structured, and what people's schedules are, and how quickly we can get them to meet. I mean, there's a lot of variables built into there that we don't necessarily know exactly how it will go.
And for a sense of scale, last time around we had 100 reviewers, so scheduling 100 people to get together and talk with each other and go over their scores took, as you might imagine, quite a bit of time. So.
You got to orient them first, and there's these things you have to do.
Okay.
So they take time.
So we apologize again for the
Okay.
inconvenience.
Okay, so thank you. Did we have any other?
So is there other
Do you
discussion?
feel like, I mean, we weren't scheduled to vote. We could vote on this today, the request for investment, or we could wait till our next meeting. It's really up.
We were hoping you would vote on it today because we have 6 requests for investments that have to be created from this template by January 10th, your next meeting, so that we can publish it by the 16th, so that we can honor trying to go as quickly as we can, as we just heard.
Okay.
We will have to make
there'll be a
modifications
preference
for
that we
each
vote on
funding
this
area
today.
to these.
We're
Staff
hoping.
preference that we vote on this.
Yeah.
Staff
Don't
preference.
Possibly others.
Staff always gets what they want, so let's.
Oh, yes, Mitch. You've been around a long time, so you've seen that, huh?
Allow it for privates?
So we can take each of the 6 things that I outlined at the beginning one by one and go over any modifications that you have and get a vote on each. So the first issue was the RFI structure, content, and point assignments, including the bonus points. And the one specific recommendation of change or modification that I heard was from Mitch regarding the section F2 in the program section and clarifying the relationship between that and E4 around the outcomes, and trying to modify the wording there so they have a more evident relationship to each other. And we're definitely looking at the outcomes the program has achieved in connection to the way in which it has measured them. Is that a correct characterization?
Great.
Okay. Are there any other content?
Dan, I've got I guess, a question on scoring. It's a conundrum for me, and I've struggled to try to figure out. Have we had, what's the percentage of programs that we funded that have failed midstream or not been able to meet their obligations or commitments?
Very few.
So, we can either say, and I'm focusing on the organizational capacity and I guess to a much lesser extent budget narrative. There's been a lot of economic stress in the community, and I feel like we need to be the best stewards that we can with the public money. And I guess back to the old saw, a great plan poorly executed doesn't give you as much as an average plan executed well. All that kind of works into it, and I guess I'm a little concerned about not weighting the organizational capacity, which I think of as the organization, can the organization execute this plan that they're proposing, as down to only 20 points. I like the cultural responsiveness piece. I'm sorry, that's 10 points apiece, 20 points total. I don't have a cultural responsiveness issue, and I'm almost wondering, there wasn't as much overlap as I thought there was going to be, so I was going to originally come thinking, let's pull a little bit out of the first section and feed the cultural responsiveness section that way, and still have more points in the capacity section, but maybe that doesn't make sense as much as it did before we heard the explanation. So for some reason, it feels to me like 10 points on organizational capacity just is very low. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
Well, wasn't the justification that you had looked at other organizations' applications and that they seem to be weighting it a little bit less than we were, and so you brought that number down to reflect sort of the norm. And so were those large organizations or foundations? Maybe that would help to know.
Mostly foundations. Some of the other government ones we looked at didn't specifically have an organizational capacity section, so they were questions that were asked about it, but they were often more pro forma, actually. I would say the most common way is asking less about it and more about mission, vision, and strategic plans. And so presenting that information as part of your application package was kind of the more typical way. And people still have to do a budget and sometimes fill out financial information. But I would say foundations ask pretty uniformly, considerably less than we do. We have higher standards of accountability, so I felt like we weren't willing to go down to as little as I saw some people ask. But we thought maybe we had overweighted. I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, mm-hmm. And so I think you can make an argument either way. So we made this suggestion or recommendation, but I would defer to you all in terms of what you think you want.
Lisa, can I jump in, or Dan? I can think of two organizations that failed, that went away while we were funding them, and I remember for sure one of them, and I think both, no red flags in the application. And folks who, are they going to make it? They're still around doing fine. So we can't always even catch it.
Can't always predict.
Yeah.
So, Mitch, is this something you want us to add? What's that?
I was afraid you were going to ask me to be specific.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying, are you suggesting maybe that we add 5 points to the organizational responsiveness?
Organizational capacity.
Organizational capacity, excuse me. And maybe at the expense of the culture responsive, taking 5 points away from there?
I guess if I was going to do it, I would add 5 to organizational capacity and maybe reduce the program design from 55 to 50.
Oh, I see.
Because I support the cultural responsiveness piece of it. And I guess I feel okay about that because I do see some, there is some redundancy. It was really helpful to hear how, focus on the organization, cultural responsiveness, focus on the program, cultural specific. That's helpful. So there isn't maybe no redundancy or less redundancy, but.
Okay. Okay. Other members have thoughts, desires?
I would support it the way it is. And some experience that I've had elsewhere with funding organizations, again, I would have to agree with staff that that really, I would say for the most part, I believe that the organizations that we fund, that we can sum up or have the ability to say that these organizations can deliver the service, but that, for me, the real quality question lies really in the program work itself, and all of those items is where I think we need to really drill down, and where the point margins are going to be greater. So I would stick with the 10 points for this, believing that it's in the work of the program and the goals and quality improvement, all of that, where we really need to press.
Other thoughts? Okay. Okay, so I think there's a consensus maybe to stay up with the staff recommendation here. So do you want us now to vote on this?
If you're concluding the discussion about the RFI content, structure, and point values, including the bonus points, if you feel like you've come to kind of a conclusion about that discussion, then yes, it would be helpful if you took a vote.
Are there any other discussion items from the committee members?
Just a point of clarification, if we are going to allow for-profit corporations to apply.
We're going to, okay, go ahead.
All right,
So we're going to
not
take
there
that as a
yet.
separate vote.
Okay.
Sorry, this is just about there are 4 sections. They have the point values we've discussed. They cover kind of the major content issues we've discussed. And then there are those
Then
6
the
bonus points. So if you feel like that can be voted on, you feel comfortable with kind of the contents of those things, that would be the vote. And then we'll go over the other things we've talked about today.
Okay.
So
Really?
you might want to.
Ready to move ahead?
I'm ready to
Okay.
vote.
Okay, why don't you frame the motion, Megan? I'll.
To accept
you wanna-
staff's recommendations with Mitch's modification regarding the wording about the relationship of outcomes asked for in section 1E4 to 1F2. How's that for?
So moved.
Second?
Second, okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, whatever that was, you got it.
It's going to be more clear. That's what I
Yes.
take away. More clear.
Okay.
So the next issue for final discussion is the minimum points recommendation. The minimum points recommended for the program section is 39 out of 55 points, and the minimum points recommendation for the cultural responsiveness section is 16 out of 25 points. Discussion.
Everybody comfortable with those? Okay. Make that motion?
I would move that we accept the staff recommendation for minimum points in both the combined proven program design and effectiveness, 39 points, and in culturally responsive programs, a minimum of 16 points.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, that's approved.
All right, the third issue is the recommendation for creating a goal of funding up to 30% to culturally specific services in each of the 6 program areas.
That's not up to.
Sorry.
It's at least.
At least, sorry, thanks. I'm going to restate that goal.
The goal of getting to at least 30% would be the goal. We wouldn't limit. In other words, if
Sorry.
you wanted to invest in more than 30%, that would be okay,
Yes, thank
if you
you.
felt it merited.
But similarly, if we don't have 30%, then we can go with a lesser number, right?
Yes, I mean, I think remember, when you're making decisions, you're making them in the context of many things. That will be one of the things for the context, is you remembering that you have that goal, and we'll be drawing your attention to it and helping you understand whether your preliminary decisions are meeting that goal or not, and what would you do to want to change that. So that's the way that would come up. But it's obviously you're going to be you always take many factors into account. There's never any one thing that absolutely supersedes everything else, always.
So, I mean, just not to belabor this too much, but we would not be looking at, for instance, we just approved you need 39 points out of 55 possible under your proven program design in order to be considered eligible for funding. there wouldn't be a scenario where you'd come back to us and say we should lower that minimum points necessary in order to bring in more potential culturally responsive organizations.
I mean, we're not anticipating that. I suppose I will never say never, but I'm not anticipating doing that, no. I mean, I'm thinking if we're putting this in the RFI, that's what we're telling people they need to score. Remembering that we have a number of reviewers and those scores are averaged. Okay, so it's not like any one,
Okay.
You'll have 5 reviewers all coming together to make that decision for each section.
Somebody want to make that motion?
So moved?
Second?
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, that's approved.
All right, so the fourth was the narrowing of the applicants, and it sounds like the modifications that you previously discussed was keeping for-profit corporations and clarifying whether or not the universities are private or public or both.
Did you have something you want
I
to say?
did. So just a clarification that if we were considering for-profit corporations as applicants, could we specify that they can only recoup costs? Because essentially that's what nonprofits are doing. They're only recouping their costs. And I do have trouble with the idea of someone profiting from the levy. And so if they wanted to come in as a partner, that would be one thing. And maybe this is just for if there is an applicant that we end up discussing or seriously considering for funding, I would put that out there as something that is my value. I don't know if it needs to be spelled out here, but I am uncomfortable with the idea of a for-profit organization receiving levy money if it's clear they're going to be profiting.
One thing I would say is that it may be difficult for staff to ascertain without some kind of full financial investigation what a recovery of cost level versus of charge is, because you have to understand a fair amount about the structure of their business. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I might have some hesitation about saying that we could do that.
I would say, we're probably going to get few, if any, applications that may even fall in this category. Let us make those judgments. I think your points are well taken. I just don't want to overly prescribe something that may not even happen, I guess, at this point. Mm-hmm. But I would like to allow the possibility to happen.
Okay.
I'd like to allow the possibility for us to be wowed by something.
I appreciate other viewpoints on this, but I don't see this as any different than other contracts that the city or the county have with private businesses. It's taxpayer money that's involved in those contracts, and people do make profits. I think if we're looking at this, though, that clearly, I don't think that this is going to threaten nonprofits competing in the marketplace here. I think there would be a minimum of applicants, if any, and I think those we would be examining very closely. But I don't think it's appropriate to rule that out. And if anything, we need more public-private partnerships in this world for people to come together with a common mission. And perhaps there's some great strategy out here that we could be open to. So I would be comfortable with it.
I won't belabor the point.
Okay. Okay,
So we leave it in, is what I am hearing. Yes?
Leave it in, yeah.
Leave it in. Allow that category of eligibility.
And, okay, so I'm going to try to figure out to read what, on our draft RFI on the very first page, it says eligible applicants. It currently lists nonprofit corporations, local education agencies, community colleges, and universities. And what I'm hearing is nonprofit corporations adding for-profit corporations, local education agencies, community colleges, and universities. Julie, you brought up the point about private or public. Do you want us to add the words private or public in front of universities?
Well, I would suppose that if we're going to permit for-profit corporations, it would be either public or private. Universities could also be eligible. Mm-hmm. So I think it's okay in that case, just to say universities.
Okay, so don't add those modifiers.
I was gonna say, if we just leave it blank, I think it covers whatever, right? There's no limitation.
Okay.
Okay, somebody want to make that motion? I'll make it.
Can you read it one more time?
Sure. Eligible applicants includes for-profit corporations, nonprofit corporations, for-profit corporations, local education agencies, community colleges and universities, period.
So I think we probably ought to use the word entities rather than the corporations, because
Okay.
corporations is a very limited form of, or structure for most for-profit entities these days.
Thank you for that clarification.
I'll make that motion. Second, okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. It's approved. And we have one more?
Yes, minimum grant size. You had no changes to our recommendation about minimum grants at $50,000 per year.
Okay, any further discussion? Somebody want to make that motion?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And the last one was the funding process that Lisa Hansel outlined, and I don't think you had any recommendations for modifications to that process either. But any discussion?
Okay. So the motion would be,
So is accept the process that staff has recommended for
Okay.
your decision-making around funding.
It's outlined in the draft template.
we want to make that motion?
So moved.
Second, okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we have a request for investment. Rubric, I guess you call it.
Templates.
Template, yeah, I like template better.
Next time you'll have 6
I'm not sure I
different
understand
ones to look
rubric.
at to add to your reading pleasure. No, we'll highlight for you what the additions are for each addition, for each program area. There will be some specifics, and we'll highlight for those what you have to look at, so you don't have to read it all over again. But that will be what's up next. And there will have to be some level of modifications for the different program areas to make sure that it all fits. So,
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank staff for all their hard work in getting us to this point, and we will be having, our next meeting will be at 2 p.m. on Friday, January 10th, 2014, right here at City Council Chambers. And you'll be receiving updates and reminders from the staff, and I want to remind people they can always go to our website, portlandchildrenslevy.org, or go to the Levy Facebook page to keep up to date. So hope everyone has a healthy, safe, and happy new year. We stand adjourned for the year 2013.
thank you.